The Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU for short as most people call it, 10 years. 10 freaking years this franchise has been alive, with 18 films already released from Iron Man to Black Panther. And for so long, this franchise has no signs of slowing down. Well, maybe a few speed bumps along the way. Hey everyone, Elijah here, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Opinion Overload, or OOO for short. The H is silent. And no, I totally did not steal the name of this show from a Simple Plan song, shut up. With Infinity War arriving in a few weeks in the cinema, I thought the best way to start this series off is to give my opinion, Overload. Haha, I said the name of the show! On something I really love, comics. Which leads us to the MCU, and I am going to rank all 18 Marvel Cinematic Universe films. But in this episode, we'll be focusing on the bottom 9 first. The following films you're about to see in my bottom 9 list, not by any means bad films. There are no bad films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They range from decent to very awesome films. The reason why these films are in the bottom 9 is it's just that Marvel has released far more better films than these 9 films. Right now, I'm going to share you my opinion on which are my least favorite or what I see as the bottom 9 MCU films. Got it? Now on with the list. Remember that one time when Mark Ruffalo looked a lot like Edward Norton? Incredible Hulk is not by any means a bad film. It's actually the best Hulk film to date. Oh wait, that's not saying much. But it's still a good film. To me, it just doesn't reach the standards of the MCU today. I actually fell asleep the first time I watched this. Maybe it's because it's too bland for me. There's also the fact that this is the most disconnected MCU film, with Thunderbolt Ross as the only character who still shows up in a future MCU film. It also doesn't help that Edward Norton didn't stick around, which bothers me. Don't get me wrong, Mark Ruffalo is by far a better Bruce Banner and Hulk, but continuity is a huge factor for me when it comes to a shared universe. Maybe it's just that I'm not a huge Hulk fan. I hope that doesn't get him angry though. Thor films. They are usually seen as the weak parts of the MCU. And Thor the Dark World is one of the huge reasons why this is the case. This film introduced an Infinity Stone, the Ether, the Reality Stone. And yet it's still a boring and irrelevant installment of the MCU. And that's a bad thing. There are some good stuff and there is some bad stuff, but let's start with the bad. The villain, Malekith, is by far the most forgettable villain in the MCU. And would you believe that he was played by Christopher freaking Eccleston, the 9th Doctor from Doctor Who? I didn't believe it at first. Yeah, you left Doctor Who because you didn't want to be typecasted, and here you are, the most forgettable MCU villain ever. Also, Sif over Jane Foster. Jane Foster is worthless in this film. She gets infected with the ether and then indirectly causes Asgard to be invaded by the Dark Elves and get Frigga, Thor's mother, killed along with other Asgardians. So, Team Sif all the way. The best parts about this film can be summed up in just one word really. Loki. Loki is the only redeeming part of this film. Also, that Captain America cameo is pretty awesome. Thor the Dark World just didn't give anything to make it stand out. And that's why it's on number 17. Surprise, surprise. It's Thor again in this bottom 9 list. I'm not really gonna get into too much detail on why Thor is on number 16 because it shares the same problems with its sequel. Thor introduced us to Asgard at least, which actually looks beautiful, especially the Bifrost. And Odin, the all-powerful, all-father, spends most of the film asleep. And that's one of my biggest problems of Odin's portrayal in the MCU. He was portrayed as someone who is weak and old, which sucks. The Warriors 3, probably the most forgettable side characters of the MCU in history. They weren't given enough personality. I mean, do you even remember their names? I mean, there's Robin Hood and there's Jackie Chan, and then there's Hagrid. You're a wizard, Harry. This film introduced us to one of the most iconic Marvel villains, Loki. And this is why Thor is better than Thor the Dark World, because the villain actually gets character development. You can see how and why he turned out the way he did. Also, the fight scenes, especially when Thor and Sif and Warriors 3 battled the Frost Giants. So good. I just love it when Thor uses his hammer and it flies around hitting multiple enemies. Still, Thor didn't put something memorable on the table. Oh yeah, there's Hawk! Iron Man 2 had this hard task of surpassing its predecessor, Iron Man. The film that started it all, the film that started the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How can Iron Man 2 beat that? Did Iron Man 2 actually beat Iron Man? Nope. The best part of every Iron Man film is, of course, Robert Downey Jr. He's just perfect for the role. He is Tony Stark. He is Iron Man. But everything else was meh. Let's start with the villain, Whiplash, another forgettable character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I never really cared about Ivan Vanko. The film didn't give enough reason to invest in this character, though the other villain, Justin Hammer, was a little more interesting at least. Perhaps my biggest complaint in this film are the blueprint scenes and when the SHIELD logo appears on the screen. I mean, come on, the sound effects are too loud and it overpowers the people talking on screen.
If you'll direct your attention to said screen, I believe trying to talk them out of rolling tanks of the PCH, knocking.
Plus, the blueprint screens are too long, especially during the fight scenes when it's supposed to be all epic and they're like, oh wait, look at these things, aren't they cool? It's kinda distracting and cuts off the action. Speaking of fight scenes, they're pretty good, especially the final scene between Iron Man and War Machine against Whiplash. This was also the debut of Black Widow and of course she was so awesome. The plot was all over the place, but I do like the arc of Tony finding a replacement for his palladium core in the arc reactor, which was supposed to keep him alive, but it's now poisoning him. It leads a lot of moments of weakness from Tony and gives a nod to the classic Iron Man story, Demon in a Bottle, where Tony battles alcoholism. It also gives way for Tony's relationship with his father, Howard Stark. Every time I see that scene where Howard talks to Tony from beyond the grave through old clips, I still get a bit emotional.
What is and always will be my greatest creation is you.
Iron Man 2 didn't give anything else to the MCU as a whole, besides a few Easter eggs, but it still didn't make much of an impact. Also, that's young Peter Parker. Yup, they confirmed it. That's young Peter Parker. Avengers Age of Ultron took everything people loved from the first Avengers and they made it bigger. But bigger doesn't mean better. It made the film a lot more confusing and made the villain Ultron a lot more underwhelming. When trailers for Avengers Age of Ultron came out, Ultron was portrayed as someone who was so scary and intimidating, and in the actual film, he wasn't. The plot was, again, all over the place. But what bothered me the most was the romance between Bruce and Natasha. Like, where the hell did that come from? It wasn't even established in the first Avengers, and even in the comics, there's no such thing. If anything, Natasha should have been more distant from Bruce, seeing him Hulk out in the first Avengers. Though I commend this film for establishing a lot of future key players properly, like Scarlet Witch, Vision, Ulysses Claw, Quicksilver. Didn't see that coming. Also, some more screen time and focus on Hawkeye after being mind-controlled in the first one. He even references it during a fight scene, which is kind of funny.
Done the whole mind control thing. Not a fan.
Speaking of fight scenes, this is the film's strength. The fight scenes, the intro, the Hulkbuster versus Hulk battle, the battle in Sokovia, all of it was epic. Yes, Age of Ultron had a lot of problems, but it's still a fun film. I remember watching Avengers Age of Ultron with my friends in the cinema after finishing a term in college. And it was a perfect term ender watching Avengers Age of Ultron because it really was a fun film. When Captain America throws his mighty shield. As Cap's first solo film, it really nailed the aesthetics of the 40s. The origin of Steve Rogers, Captain America, was portrayed in the best way possible. It really showed Steve Rogers' desire to be a soldier and to do right, even though he doesn't have the body for it, but he has the heart. His friendship with Bucky was one of my favorite scenes in the film, and it actually became a major plotline for Civil War. Hugo Weaving as Red Skull was great, though he was killed off rather anticlimactically. Peggy Carter was badass. Howard Stark also had some time to shine as well, as he also creates Cap's shield from his only supply of vibranium. I also find this film very important for the MCU, especially in Phase 1, as it sets up a lot of things. This was the first film to feature an Infinity Stone as a plot device, the Tesseract, the Space Stone. It was also the last film before the Avengers, therefore if this film failed, the Avengers wouldn't have been as successful as we know it today. And you might be asking, well, if you like this film so much, then why is this on the bottom 9? Well, first up, have you seen that CGI head on that body of Steve Rogers before he was given the serum? Second, I didn't find the plot with Hydra that much interesting at all. And lastly, the next two films in the Captain America trilogy, yeah, those two films are far, far better. So for this film, we're going to read the synopsis, okay? So that it's easier to understand. So this film focuses on our hero crossing paths with a fan, whom he turns away, who becomes as successful as him in the future, and becomes a villain who vowed to take everything away from our hero. Oh wait, I was reading the plot for The Incredibles. Let me read the actual plot for Iron Man 3. So this film focuses on our hero crossing paths with a fan whom he... Yep, the plot for Iron Man 3 is actually The Incredibles. No, but in all seriousness, it didn't make the film a lot less interesting. Most fans of the MCU see Iron Man 3 as the worst Iron Man film. Well, to me, it was actually more interesting than Iron Man 2. The idea that Tony actually suffers from anxiety after the Battle of New York makes him more human and believable. I mean, if I saw an alien spaceship coming down to Earth in front of me, I'd be shitting my pants. Then there's the Mandarin. Well, sorta. And that's the biggest negative of Iron Man 3. They made the Mandarin as nothing but a role. He's not real, and that sucks. The Mandarin is one of Iron Man's most known villains. Well, the good thing is, they fixed all of this in the All Hail the King tie-in, where it's revealed that the Mandarin is actually a real person. Anyway, fight scenes are awesome as always. I enjoyed the Mark 42 armor, scenes where Tony battles the Mandarin agents with no armor at all, and only using items he crafted on the spot is awesome. I just really love it when they show how resourceful and how smart Tony is. It reminds me so much of the first hour of the first Iron Man film, which I really loved. Iron Man 3, to me, is a deep character study of Tony Stark. It's focused more on Tony than Iron Man. I mean, Tony without the armor has more screen time than with him inside one. And I find that very interesting. Iron Man 3 is the finale of Iron Man solo films, and I think they did it very well. Though there's so much things that could have been done better. Perhaps one of the most unique films in the MCU, Doctor Strange. It introduced us to the mystical side of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The whole film is a cornucopia of special effects and it's beautiful. Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange is perfect. This is one of the best solo introduction films to a Marvel hero. I also like that they didn't destroy New York this time as they were fighting in the mirror dimension. Fight scenes are also beautiful as it is complemented with special effects around them. This was also the introduction of the Time Stone, which is, in my point of view, the most powerful Infinity Stone. Though some people will say the Reality Stone, the Time Stone can literally fix anything. I mean, you can reverse time. I don't really get why Wong keeps telling him not to use it. Yes, it can destroy the fabric of space and time just like any time travel plotline says, but come on, it even saves him at the end when he dies, which Marvel does all the time, except Quicksilver. Man, I still didn't see that coming. Maybe the only negative here is again, the villain, Caecilius. He was pretty average at best. And lastly, one of the best fight scenes in the MCU, which ironically doesn't even see Doctor Strange actually fight, is with Dormammu. It's a fight of smarts and wits, which Doctor Strange does by trapping Dormammu in a time loop, which leads to one of the most iconic lines.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
I also like that they made Baron Mordo an ally before turning him into a villain in the next film, as it gives him a good reason to be a villain. Doctor Strange is a great film, but just like everything else in this list, it just misses out of the top 9. And that couldn't be more true with the next film on this list. When Marvel announced that Edgar Wright will be directing AntMan, I was so hyped because Edgar Wright is probably my favorite director of all time. I love the Cornetto trilogy, and most of all, I love Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. It's my favorite movie of all time. But then he left and got replaced by Peyton Reed, who is still a good director, but Well, at least Edgar Wright is still credited as the writer, and I can really see some shades of his influence on this film. This is the first heist comedy film in the MCU, and Edgar Wright is really good with these types of scenes. Paul Rudd is as charming as always, and he is perfect for the role, as well as everyone else, especially Michael Peña. I want that man to narrate my life when I die. I really love the science of this film, the PM particles and how it works, the special effects that come with it, the fight scenes when Ant-Man turns small, all very awesome. Also, you know you've done something right when an ant has more impact as a character than the Warriors 3 from Thor. Rest in peace, Anthony. Perhaps again, the downside, the villain. Yellow Jacket looks very cool, but he's just another Marvel villain. He dies at the end, and nothing comes out of it after that. Now, Ant-Man would be the calm before the storm that is Civil War, and it became the perfect closer for Phase 2. I think they did that very, very well. And that was my bottom 9 MCU films. Again, none of these films are bad films. They are all good. It's just that there are far more MCU films, which we will be talking about in the next episode of Opinion Overload. Leave in the comments below your 9 bottom MCU films. Join me next time when I rank my top 9 MCU films of all time. To immediately see that video as soon as it comes out, click subscribe and that bell icon below this video. Well, those are my opinions and I'd like to know yours. Stay nerdy and see you next time. Bah! Number 15. Burger King foot lettuce. The last thing you want in your Burger King burger is... God damn it.